The more we conflate beauty with goodness, and we conflate beauty with spending money and consumption, then by the transitive property in math, right, the more worthiness is tied to consumption.
Welcome to Actual People, a podcast hosted by me, Chauncey, dedicated to meaningful conversations about the evolving landscape of our lives and the power of our own creativity and imagination to make magic. Welcome back to Actual People. Today is an interview day. This week's episode is an interview with NPR host-at-large and TED Talks daily host, Elise Hu. She lived in Seoul and wrote a book called Flawless that looks at the current state of beauty standards, and she does this by diving deep into the world of K-beauty, or Korean beauty, which has become a global phenomenon. Looking at that explosive growth is a peek into the future. Seoul, Korea is itself a very futuristic city. Even if I'm drawn to authentic and fundamental ways of relating to the earth and to each other, I am paradoxically always a futurist. So with that in mind, I'm going to read some of my favorite excerpts from the book before I launch into the interview to give you a little bit of context. But I definitely recommend you going out and buying the book. It's pretty amazing. Who writes, "The technological gaze keeps feeding us an ever-evolving, ever-narrowing beauty ideal. With enough money, we can use artificial implants, injections, or surgery to look however we want. What happens when the aesthetic enhancement technologies are so mature that realizing our perfect visions is made possible? If hypermodern Korea is the direction we're going, what should we know now that we will wish we did later?" She argues that we've moved from the male gaze to the technological gaze, which is a very different and potentially frightening thing. But it's not all black and white. We get into all that and more in our interview. And now, without further ado, here's our interview. I've read your book. It's amazing. I have to admit that while I was reading it, I went to Sephora. I hadn't bought makeup in a while. It was like kind of
There's
the
a boomerang effect to the book where it's like, this book is about body autonomy and liberation and all things, but also I'd love to get that foot peel.
You talk about dualities in the book. So the duality, first off, of the fun and playfulness of beauty treatments and makeup, but also what is it that draws us back to wanting to fix ourselves physically?
First of all, there's nothing wrong with wanting to fix ourselves. I think betterment is awesome. I want to fix myself by being kinder. I want to be more curious. I want to be a better listener. There are worthy ways of betterment. And so this book certainly doesn't come down on betterment. What I worry about is, especially with adolescence, coming of age during a time in which so much of our morality and our goodness is tied in with notions of prettiness. And we have this attractiveness halo effect that we assign to people who we consider pretty. And that starts as young as elementary school, like that the pretty girl must also have a good life. And it continues into the work world, in which men, for example, who are taller or considered more attractive tend to do better in job interviews or get more callbacks and things like that. And so this attractiveness halo effect, this pretty privilege, follows us throughout life. And what it does is it confers these qualities of goodness, of being a good person, onto people who are pretty. We then seek it and try and look better at the expense, in some cases, of developing a fuller sense of self. And so, what I think it's worthwhile for all of us to do is to really reflect on that and to recognize the way that we have lookism and these biases about beauty and biases about attractiveness, external attractiveness, that come to get internalized in our own lives and our own thinking, such that it can be marginalizing for anybody who can't fit in. And that's what I worry about, just like all the other isms, racism, sexism, discrimination against those with disabilities. There is a sense that there are these larger systems at work, and I think that we need to pay far more attention to them than we currently do, because yes, it is super fun to try and buy products and to bond with your daughters or bond with your mothers or bond with your friends through spa treatments and getting your nails done. And I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that and celebrating the goodness and the sort of fun aspects of beauty culture. I just think that we do need to examine the larger systems at play and make sure that in celebrating beauty culture, we aren't celebrating some really potentially toxic ideas too.
There is something about a harmonious face that makes you feel like that person is organized, neat, trustworthy. If you are a critical thinker, self-aware, having good values, that seems like a very negative thing, but that is very human at the same time. How do you reconcile those things?
I worry that the more narrow our standards for pretty become, then the wider the pool for ugly gets. And yes, it might be individually beneficial to fit into the standards because it's easier, right? It might be easier just to appear smooth or firm or youthful or thin. Those things are not in reach for everyone. It can be out of reach for many bodies who might not ever be able to fit into those particular norms. And every body deserves to be worthy and safe and loved. And every body is worthy. I worry that it's harmful, it's collectively harmful when we have beauty standards that aren't possible for everybody to reach.
Well, so you're talking about the narrowness of it. So that brings me to your points about dualities. In society right now, that definition of beauty has over time become wider and wider. It is way more inclusive than it used to be. Going into Sephora, there's a whole beauty brand that is based on different body sizes. I'm sure there's many of them, but there was one that really stuck out to me when I first walked in. It was completely embracing larger, luscious beauty that it's definitely not about these like very narrow frames. There's more racial diversity. But in the book that you wrote, in Korean culture and South Korean culture, it seems like that beauty standard is very narrow. And when you look at like the Real Housewives, that beauty standard is very narrow and really different from how it used to be. The surgery is making faces more and more the same. So it's almost like these two things are happening at once where there is more inclusivity. Beauty is not defined by, you know, 30 years ago, blonde hair and big boobs the way it used to be at all.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
all kinds of beauty, different kinds of models, more representation. It's too slow, but it's definitely happening. And at the same time, there's also this weird standard that almost looks like AI that, I was talking to my friend who's Korean, and we were looking at images of some of the people that you mentioned in the book and this virtual influencer, Rosie. And
Mhm.
these images look really very samey. So how do you reconcile that dichotomy of this inclusion and beauty is not one thing, and this also other faction that's really samey same?
Yeah, beauty culture is really complicated. In some ways, I do feel like there's been progress in terms of racial inclusivity. So, makeup that's available in lots of different shades now. And that wasn't necessarily the case when I was growing up. There is also a lot more size diversity that I like to see in representation. Growing up, I'm a child of the 80s and the 90s, and we had a lot of like Ally McBeal lollipop heads with big breasts. And that was really difficult because you end up normalizing. Sort of want to be what you see, and you end up normalizing to that. And I never realized that, oh, that's not how every body looks. There just wasn't enough diversity in what I saw. And so in those areas, I do think my children are coming up seeing a lot more diversity than was represented in media when I was growing up. On the other hand, my children are coming up in front of screens and in front of filters that never existed when I was a child. And so they are able to see these endless feeds of what is considered the beauty standard today on these get ready with me videos from TikTok influencers. There certainly is an aesthetic, a Gen Z aesthetic, and that aesthetic generally adheres to the global beauty standards of smoothness, firmness, thinness, and youth. And even as these filters become a melange of various standards, so like larger butts from the global south, higher noses from Northern Europe, kind of a a darker skin tone, but not too dark, that is a mix of various races from across the world. You get this cyborgian melange of beauty standards. It was called Instagram face a few years ago, but now it's probably more AI or metaverse face
What
and
is the
metaverse.
Instagram face like the duck lips? What's Instagram face?
Yeah, it's kind of like Jessica Rabbit, meets Kardashian sister. And it's an impossible
The
standard
sexy
to
baby thing that you
achieve.
said.
Yes, yes, it's an impossible standard to achieve unless it's achieved digitally or with a lot of expensive intervention like fillers and in these days Ozempic or various regimens for your body to have a big butt and yet a snatched waist, and a really defined chin and big lips, but a high nose, and all these different things that are a mix and match of various desired body parts. And that is really worrying because if we are letting artificially driven standards or AI generated filters dictate real world beauty standards. AI, by its very definition, is inhuman, it's unnatural, and it's going to only get increasingly cyborgian. I saw this image of what AI considered an ideal male body, and they're incredibly roided out, jacked up men that I don't think that you could achieve in real life without either working out, 6 hours a day and taking testosterone supplements or with actual steroids. But that's what AI imagines as the ideal male body. And so you can take this to its logical extremes when it comes to women and women's standards too. Because if we are allowing our standards to be set by the digital world, by an artificial gaze, then artificial gazes are inhuman. They are cyborgian. And where do we draw the line? We have biomedical technology that's improving too when it comes to how we can change our physical bodies, the actual canvas. Where do we draw the line on what we do to ourselves and how we modify our bodies? And those were the kinds of questions that kept presenting themselves again and again in my reporting, but continue to as we live in this day and age of generative AI and cheaper, faster, less invasive cosmetic intervention.
I did a podcast about Valentine's Day and how love songs have changed in their lyrics. I was doing the Substack version of it, just writing it out. I decided to use Dolly because the last person I interviewed, she coaches clients on AI and how to use it in their work. I haven't been using the visual stuff. So I looked for images about love songs and lyrics and music. And every woman that Dolly spit out had a woman showing her stomach. If I said, can you make her skin a little darker? The first one was a black woman with an afro, very stereotypical 70s outfit.
Uh-huh.
It was so racist. It just kept going and going down this racist path. I said, make them different sexual orientations. A bunch of rainbows appeared. It was awful. There's something also about those TikTok videos. Some of the stuff, it feels a little bit sinister. I'm always on the fence. I've done nothing. Should I do something? But I hate when I see it, like a lot of stuff done. I hate when I see what they're doing in post-production, but yet we're on a Zoom call with a filter. So it's like, how have you resolved to navigate this space for yourself and for your children? How old are your children, by the way?
They're 6 and 8 and 11, and they're all girls.
I have 10-year-old twin girls. And so far, they are not affected by this stuff. They're in fourth grade, they're on the cusp. I don't let them spend time on social media, particularly. They look over my shoulder. We look at some stuff on social media, but they don't really even like when I put makeup on. They seem alarmed by it when I wear makeup. My daughter came in this morning. She's like, "Mommy, do you think maybe you have too much makeup?" And like, I don't have very much makeup, but to her, it was too much makeup.
Yeah, it seems like every pediatrician and all of the experts seem to advise that you should hold off on social media for your teens until like high school or as late as possible. I was doing an event with a bunch of UCLA pediatricians, and they talked about how they didn't want their kids to have social media at all. I have a more, just because I grew up with a lot of technology, and I think that pop culture is a form of art that should be understood. I don't want to keep my kids off it. I don't ban it completely. What I try to do is spend as much as time as possible watching it with them so I'm aware of what they're into. Keep our connections really strong so that they feel as though they can talk to me and ask me questions about the kinds of things that they're seeing. What I really worry about is actually going in the opposite extreme and just ban them from seeing anything or being on TikTok completely, such that it would become really, really attractive for them. They would be more compelled to try and spend time on TikTok
Yeah,
because their mom
exactly.
was like, no, 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 no. So instead, I am cool with them sort of seeing YouTube shorts or seeing TikTok on a desktop and just not having a device because these devices themselves can feed such addictions. And then keeping our lines of dialogue open as much as possible about what they're seeing, the way that social media kind of works in our brains, like they're slot machines and then can feed addictions, but also the way that all of our feeds are so different from one another. They're seeing a bunch of skincare stuff because of A, their age group, and B, they tend to engage with skincare stuff. And the more they engage with one particular topic, whether it's puppies, whether it's skincare, whether it's skateboarding, the algorithms know to send more and more of it. So I think literacy is really important. I think parents kind of not shunning it completely is also helpful in being able to relate with your teen or your tween as they are coming up in a very digital world. In the way that I parent with regard to this beauty culture that we're in is show, not tell, because the opposite was true with me growing up in that I realized, my mom and probably a lot of our moms would say things like, oh, your weight doesn't matter. You're pretty at any size. Everybody is pretty. You're pretty inside out. Nah, nah, nah. But then they themselves would participate in beauty culture by weighing themselves all the time or trying these fad diets. And you would see how your mom or your aunties or your grandparents would behave, even though they would tell you that you didn't need to behave this way. And so, my antidote to that is yes, I say that, your worthiness needs to come from your insides and not your outsides, and that all bodies are worthy and all bodies deserve to be safe. And I do show them a lot of diversity in sizes because that's what I think I lacked a lot in terms of representation. But at the same time, I also try to live a life in which I believe my body is worthy and I believe that my body is meant to feel good instead of look good, or that feeling good is more important than looking good. And so I do not linger in front of mirrors. I do not participate very much in beauty culture. I am not primping. My kids just don't see me primping and preening a lot. They don't see me. We don't have a scale in our house. There's lots of things that I think we can do in how we live, which is what's really hard because that means sort of parenting ourselves and retraining ourselves and retraining our thinking now in midlife. And it's sometimes contrary to the ways that we actually came up because a lot of us had moms who, owing to the very real sexist and misogynist time that they came up in, really had to rely on their looks to get an edge up in the marriage market because marriage mattered more, or get an edge up in the job market because women were being discriminated against so much. So I get the ways and the values that were inculcated in our grandparents or in our parents. But we have an opportunity to kind of change the script as we go on and try and be good ancestors for the next generation. And that's what I try to model in the way that I live.
I love this idea of be good ancestors. I agree with all of these values, but there are times it's not the social pressure where you're trying to find a mate, but this other side of life where you're getting older and it's not fun because these are signs of decline that we have to face. We don't want to fall apart. We want to have pride in our appearance and look our best. I'm a single mom. I don't have time to preen and, spend a lot of time in front of the mirror. I don't have a dressing table where I sit and do like a full face of makeup. There's nowhere I'm going that would make any sense anyway.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But, I'm reading your book and I'm getting the feminist message and the cultural criticism, but I'm also getting oh, wait, that kind of sounds like should I not be denying myself some of these? Is this something fun to be included in that I'm not including myself in because I have this intellectual snobbery about it? You know what I mean? I just wanted to hear your
Yeah, no,
reaction to.
beauty is full of paradoxes. It can be really empowering and then disempowering at the same time. It can lead to a lot of pleasure, but then also a lot of pain, and it all takes place on the same canvas. And so I learned a lot from older Korean women. They're called ajumas. They're kind of aunties, in their 60s or 70s, though really any middle-aged woman can be called an ajuma. And what they were able to teach me, and the research kind of backs this up, is that there is a point in your life when you're no longer in the target of beauty industry marketing, that you can really enjoy your body and age affirmatively and feel good and take pleasure in a lot of rituals like getting a facial or exercise, dance classes, whatever it is, and really celebrate kind of the skin that you're in and the body that you're in without chasing some random aesthetic goals or chasing this notion of trying to look like you're 35. Flawless, my book actually has a whole chapter on these ajumas and how they take a certain kind of pleasure in caring for their bodies at an older age. They care for their bodies and their hair and their skin as a way to live a good life and live a full life for a longer period of time. Because they would say things like, I don't want my kids to have to take care of me, or I don't want to be a burden on my adult children who also have children of their own. I want to stay healthy and feel good. And to some extent, that means looking good and being presentable to other people in my community. So they all live in the same kind of senior living community. Taking care of their bodies is just a matter of sort of reciprocity and caring for one another, which is a self care that I can get behind. And also, and kind of health and affirmative aging that celebrates their differences, but also celebrates a way to feel good and arrive at the best version of themselves. What the Ajumas model in their 60s and 70s is something that those of us in our 30s and 40s can try and aspire to now, right? It's to celebrate our bodies without forcing them into any sort of rigid norms, to take care of them as a matter of prevention. I wear those giant visors now,
You do?
sunscreen.
You wear the
Yeah.
visors? That's so.
Yeah, I love the big visors. I wear a lot of sunscreen. There's lots of things that I think that you can celebrate feeling good and feeling good in your body instead of returning to your body in a way that is not about chasing whatever TikTok fads or consumption fads are out there in the moment.
The difference seems to me is affirming who you are and that glow up of who you are with whatever you're doing, ritual around honoring yourself versus self mutilation. Any way that you're kind of shaming yourself or self flagellation of any kind, adhering to a standard that is not part of who you really are. Do you think surgery is always a bad thing? I've had these conversations with a lot of my friends. We're all on the fence about doing this, that, or the other. Some have done some things, some have not. We talk about what we could do or should do. What is your take on that? I mean, I guess from a moral standpoint and also from a, healthy living and happiness standpoint.
I think that often it's good for the individual. A lot of people who Botox, for example, or make kind of little less invasive changes, it relieves, at least in the short run, some anxiety about aging or not fitting in. Because now, in kind of these upper middle class circles, a lot of the moms are participating in various interventions, let's call them fillers, Botox, whatever it is, minor nip tucks. And so it can individually help relieve anxiety. The flip side of it is that it's not good for the collective. Because if you are kind of raising the standard and participating for yourself, and then the next person also gets Botox, and then the next person also gets Botox because everybody in your group seems to be getting Botox, then you have raised the standards such that everybody is now having to chase this particular thing and then redo it every 3 to 6 months, however often you're having to do it. And so when we think about beauty labor, I think that it's worth thinking about as kind of a long tail, once you start, you can't stop kind of situation. If you are considering it in those terms, you should consider like how long you want to keep up with it. And so I kind of so I don't have any sort of prescribed answer on that. I'm not like, oh yes, this is wholly bad or wholly good. I think it can often be good for individuals, but we should question whether it's good for our communities and whether it's good for our collective, because I don't think it's good for the collective. And I think it's worthwhile to be thinking about one another and making considerations like this, because the more we sort of maintain particular standards that maybe one particular community can afford, you're keeping a lot of people out, those who cannot afford it and cannot keep up with Botox all the time or even consider it. You're keeping them as part of an out group. And so I don't want to live in a society that is marginalizing and exclusive of people with difference. And what I worry about with participating in surgeries and things that aren't in the reach of everybody is that you're not celebrating the difference that's inherent to all of us. And then you're also marginalizing anybody who can't be part of it. I don't think the cure for racism is to make everyone white. I don't think the cure for fat phobia is to make everyone skinny. And I don't think the cure for lookism or appearance-based discrimination should be to make everyone interchangeably pretty. It should actually be the opposite. It should be to celebrate the differences and diversity that's inherent in the human experience. And so this is a long way to go to get a burger, but I'm kind of getting to your question about plastic surgery, in that if this plastic surgery is all in the service of trying to look the same, then we do have a problem. We have a problem collectively, because it means that we are rejecting difference. And that
We're
is
also
hard.
rejecting who we are. And I mean, I'm thinking about this cyborgian thing that you
Standards, yeah.
mentioned earlier in the conversation. I used to have like a kind of jokey conversation with a friend years ago that I thought that aliens were us in the future coming back and looking at us, and that that we eventually will have these big pointy heads with the big eyes and the small digits. We'd be skinny and emaciated because we wouldn't need our arms, and the big heads, and we would wrap around eyes because we'd be looking at a screen. I'm partially kidding, but that image of those aliens is also a lot like the way we are
AI imagines us to
sculpting
be.
our face. Yeah, or way AI is imagining it. It has become a status symbol to look really weird and really changed by surgery. Like Jocelyn Wildenstein back in the day, she was a real pioneer making herself look like a cat. I had pictures of her on my desk, and I worked at 17 magazine, not because I wanted to look like her, but because I thought it looks hideous. But then, it's normalized. It's a status symbol because it's expensive. Some extreme plastic surgery, it's not an objective statement, but the features are not on right. The hairline is all the way in the back. Grotesquerie has cachet. That is a symbol of status or beauty or being in the know to completely change your face. And I think, what is the difference between that and buying a Rolls Royce as a status symbol that separates yourself from people who could never afford a car that costs upward of $500,000
Yeah,
type of
I
thing?
mean, the more we conflate beauty with goodness, and then we conflate beauty with spending money and consumption, then by the transitive property in math, right, the more worthiness is tied to consumption. Like our
Right.
worthiness is now how much we can buy to do things to ourselves. And I'm curious, Chauncey, because our kids are around the same age, like, what do you make of this wider, maybe cultural shift that we're seeing with kids 10 to 12 years old raiding Sephora stores, the Sephora tweens that we're seeing?
I don't really know anything about I don't know what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
so
That's
there's this trend in which 10 to 11-year-old girls, because of the influence of TikTok, are all starting these get ready with me videos and 10-step skincare routines, and they are raiding Sephora's and using up all the testers, and the employees are just like aghast. And I find it to be such a creepy form of gateway
creepy.
capitalism, right? Because you're just creeping into these younger and younger ages to say, you need to buy stuff. God forbid you get any older or you have any wrinkles appear at age 12. You better start using some preventative skincare.
I
But
was going
at
to
this,
ask you about the about Gen Z, which is a little bit older than that age group, and their fear of turning 30 and that whole
yes.
trend of
Yeah. Well, I don't know what to think of it. I'm sort of like, gosh, this is exactly where our dystopian future is going to lead. Under this transitive property I'm talking about, which is like spending equals worthiness, when you're trying to search for your sense of self as an adolescent, it would make sense that you're trying to spend money in order to buy beauty, in order to buy a sense of being loved. But what are we going to do about it? How do I handle that as a mother? How do we strike the right balance? I don't know that I have a hard and fast answer to that. It's we're trying to like grope around in this new and fast changing territory.
I think I'm holding on to the idea that maybe my kids can somehow bypass it. I think the worst years are middle school. The only things that are happening right now is that sometimes their feelings are hurt by their peer group. It's never about the way they look, not yet. Well, that's not true. One of my daughters has really short hair and she just got her hair shaved on the side. She wanted to look like old Miley Cyrus look.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And she went to school and she got some negative comments, but she seemed to brush them off. In fact, when I tried to kind of probe a little bit, I thought I need to back off. She seemed to not be worried about it. She likes boyish things. She's very much, identifies as a girl, but likes to have short hair and likes sports and is her own person. Right now, they're holding steady. The other one is kind of a girly girl. That's what she calls herself. And she, thinks she's pretty and loves herself and loves kawaii and cute things and has friends, has had her feelings hurt by them, but it's not been about her looks. And they go to a very multicultural school. And so right now they're holding steady to good values and good self-esteem. And I don't know what's going to happen in the next phase. They know that, it's normal to sometimes worry about these things, but I have them sort of center themselves in the narrative and understand other people are centering themselves in the narrative. Other people are just trying to protect themselves, fit in and get along, and that nothing is personal about them. And that's kind of where I am at with trying to help them through their emotions. It's working so far. I'm really afraid of middle school, so afraid that I'm trying to make plans to take them out of the country for a year. I want to move to Japan. I haven't figured it out yet, but that's what I want to do. I want to take them out of it because I'm so afraid of it. But
Yeah,
there's
kids
no
can be
sign.
mean. Kids can be mean. And then these trends seem so prevalent. I don't remember wearing makeup in middle school. I definitely didn't have a skincare routine. And
Noxema.
yeah, Noxema. And then now all these kids have so much knowledge about what to get and what to buy, and the it creams and the it serums and the it cleansers and the lip oils. And I have one of those girlies, which is so ironic considering I am a body liberation journalist. Like I care a lot about trying to forge for the next generations a world in which we have less body anxiety.
I think they'll go through their experimentation and testing and trying and playing, and that you need to accept that and show that you accept that they're doing that, and they will come back around to your value system because they'll hear you, especially if you intellectualize and work these things out in conversation with them and ask them questions and you're working on these things. That kind of dialogue is what they will internalize. I really believe that.
I hope so. Yeah, because I asked them, one of them is a big fan of Ariana Grande.
Mhm.
And she was like, yeah, Ariana Grande was getting body shamed because she got all this plastic surgery and na 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 na. And that's just an opportunity to be like, what do you think?
Mhm.
And so I said, well, what do you think about all of it? And she was really sweet. That This is my 8-year-old third grader, and she was like, well, I think that she should do what she wants with her body, and then she was like, is that right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, but this is a lot more complicated. We could get
Well,
into very psychology,
I
but
show my inner conflicts to my
yeah.
kids. I mean, I used to be super skinny and little, and now I had a hysterectomy early, so I went through early menopause
Mm.
because I'm BRCA positive. And so they saw like I have a harder time with my weight. And I tell them, they tell me like, you're beautiful the way you are. I mean, all these things you say not to do. And I go, I shouldn't be doing this, but it's really tough because of how I used to be. And it's just tough to stay the kind I go, but I feel like every body shape makes sense for that person. And I say, I really am struggling with these thoughts that I'm having about wishing that my body, like
Yeah, that's great.
I kind of talk out so they don't think I'm perfect and I've intellectualized everything and I have this all buttoned up into this neat package and understand, and I
Yeah,
know it all. That I also struggle a little bit, but my struggle is, and I don't, I believe like my struggle is not with like how people think of me,
right.
at
And
least
that's the
not
concern during the middle school years, right? That
right.
you are learning a sense of self that's external to you. Like you're learning to objectify yourself because you're seeing how other people think of you, and it matters so much,
It's a small
especially
pool
during
that
those
they're
years.
in.
Right.
That's the phase that they're going through. But I like this. I want to just go back to this transitive beauty mathematic equation
Property.
because
Yeah.
really I was thinking it's almost like skipping the aesthetic and going from the money means good looks. The grotesquerie of the malformed face is not pretty. I mean, it's not objectively harmonious, but it's going right to the money. So that's the transitive math there, right?
Yeah,
That it's
it
not even
doesn't seem like
attractive or
right. It doesn't have to be attractive. It has to cost. It
right.
has to have required consumption. Like you had to
Right.
have spent enough money to get this work. You had to have spent enough money to get this product,
Right.
this
Where natural
procedure.
beauty used to be something that we aspired to as a
Right.
culture. Oh, she's naturally beautiful. Now it's, oh, she didn't buy it.
Right, right, right. That's not there's and again, you're seeing more paradoxes, right? Because there is something democratizing to the notion that you don't have to just be born a certain way, that
Right.
you can do the work, the quote unquote work to look a certain way. But then I question the logic of choice there because do you really have a choice? And if you are in a society or in a community in which your looks matter so much and that your looks have to equal this particular bra size or this particular skin color or this particular nose, it's less of a choice, if it's prescribed for you. I wrestle with all of these things, and especially as kids are coming up. As you talked about, there are no hard and fast answers, but there are ways to think about it. What I've arrived at is some general frameworks for how I think about it, like good for the individual, not necessarily good for the collective, is a main one.
I love
The
that.
other is to really return to our bodies and embodiment and how we feel in our clothes, how we feel in our skin, how we feel when we're choosing
That
a
is what it's
particular
about for me too.
ritual. That's really important. And then trying as much as we can in being good examples and being good ancestors in celebrating difference, celebrating diversity, making sure that our kids see it in art, in media, in the way that we talk about other people and talk about other kids, especially. I think that's really important to show and not just tell. These are kind of just some of the guiding ways that I've come to think about trying to raise children in beauty culture and trying to live and survive and thrive in beauty culture. And then the final one with regard to the Ajumas and what I learned from the Ajumas is to think about beauty work in the frame of, is this ego driven or is this soul driven? And what I mean by that is, if I'm choosing exercise, am I doing it for an aesthetic reason, or am I doing it because of that awesome feeling, that high that I get after I go on a run or take a group exercise class? Am I participating in this particular skincare treatment, let's say a facial, because I'm trying to keep up with the Joneses, or, I'm in some sort of competition with my friends to be the cutest one among my friends? Or am I doing it because I love that feeling of physical touch and that it feels restorative, or I'm closer to God that way? Like I feel more alive and restored when I participate in that particular facial. I think we all have an emotional engine inside of us. Without sounding too woo, call it a soul. And I think that we need, especially when we're trying to navigate this kind of terrain, to really listen to our souls, to listen to those emotional engines. When I was a teenage model and battling an eating disorder, I know that if I was like to really sit with my quietest self, I would know that restricting food or counting calories and all these things, or like running 8 miles in the morning, were not soul driven. right? That is not soul driven. That is purely ego driven. And I could have even told you that probably then, even if I was in denial about it. I think that we should ask that of ourselves now, because we're all trying to heal from all the different things that culture has programmed us with, but also try and work on that in our conversations and in our curiosities with our next generations, with our children, with our nieces, with our grandkids.
Really interesting. So, what are you working on next?
There's a documentary project that's being developed right now with regard to Korea and beauty standards. And then there's also a feature film project too. So I'm getting into script writing for the first time ever. My job continues to be hosting for TED and running my podcast company.
Well, I love everything Korean cinema and anything that has to do with Korea and Japan because I love the future. I feel like that's like you're looking at a window into the future. I love the way you describe the apartment that you stayed in Korea. I love technology in that regard. It's kind of that yin and yang. Like I love nature and being close to the earth and knowing where we are on this planet, but at the same time, like this fantastical world as long as you keep it in perspective. So I look forward to that. If there's any links, I'll add them to the show notes.
Yeah, I have a Substack. Yeah, I know that you have a
Yes.
Substack, right? So just definitely link to my Substack. It's free.
Yeah, okay.
Let's see, I'll put it
I
in.
follow you and I will put it on the show notes.
Yes, yeah. It's kind of a link roundup Substack. And then I have a main website where you can find all my socials that I just
Okay, great. Let's keep in touch. And when you're about to launch your next project, we'll follow up.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
See you later.
Bye. You've been listening to Actual People. This show is written, directed, and executive produced by me, your host, Chauncey Zalkin. Show sound designed by Eric Aaron. Click on the link below to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. And don't forget to leave a review. I'll be sharing my favorites. You can find our socials and all links to deeper dives into these topics at chaunceyzalkin.com and on my Substack at chaunceyzalkin.substack.com. Actual People is available wherever you get your podcasts.